there is resistance. There are people within the Communist Party, including at the higher echelons of the Communist Party in the Central Committee and potentially the Politburo, who are trying to resist some of the policies that Xi Jinping are pushing, because they think those policies are wrong and potentially damaging to China. But passive resistance is not the same as open opposition. Open opposition will be crushed without mercy. And every one of them, particularly those in the senior echelons of the Communist Party, know that very well. And therefore, none of them will dare to openly oppose Xi Jinping.
حاولت الصين على مر تاريخها الحديث تدعيم ركائز قوتها الاقتصادية بما يساعدها في التحول إلى دولة عظمى تفرض نفسها كلاعب أساسي على الساحة الدولية، وقد نجحت بتحقيق ذلك بالاستناد إلى نظام ديكتاتوري انتهج القوة والبطش والتسلط والدبلوماسية الماكرة في الخارج ضد شعوب الدول الضعيفة للسيطرة على ثرواتها، وأيضا في الداخل ضد الشعب الصيني نفسه عبر استغلاله بالعمل القسري وقمعه والحد من حرياته وصولا إلى استعباده، حتى بات العالم كله يستنكر انتهاكات الصين لحقوق الإنسان عبر كم أفواه الصحفيين وسجنهم والقضاء على مجموعات المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان وكل معارضي النظام. ذلك عدا عن المجازر المرتكبة بحق أقلية الإيغور التي ينظر إليها دوليا على أنها عمليات إبادة جماعية. فماذا عن وضع النظام اليوم؟ هل هو أكثر تماسكاً أم أن ركائزه تتزعزع على وقع الأصوات المعارضة لحكم شي جين بينغ داخل الحزب الشيوعي الصيني؟ وهل المعارضة جدية أم أنها معارضة شكلية؟ تفتخر الصين بنظامها، فبحسب مدير المعهد الصيني في جامعة SOAS في لندن البروفيسور ستيف تسانغ، يحب الحزب الشيوعي الصيني الحاكم في الصين أن يقدم نفسه على أنه مؤسسة ميريتوقراطية على أساس أنه يعرف ما هو الأفضل ويتصرف على ذلك الأساس، ويدعي أن النظام الصيني أثبت تفوقه على الأنظمة الديمقراطية الغربية، ومقابل ذلك الادعاء لنفسه يرفض الحزب الحاكم أي شكل من أشكال المعارضة.
In terms of internal dissent, they are always being either repressed or contained. Internal dissents are simply not allowed to develop and consolidate. But over different periods of time, the scale and the extent of repression would vary. For example, under the Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao decades, they allow for some element of criticisms of the government and the Communist Party. They allow for the existence of groups like human rights lawyers. They allowed for people in Xinjiang, the Uyghur people in Xinjiang, for example, or the Tibetans in Tibet, to basically live their life on their own terms, as long as they were not doing anything that were against the party or say anything against the party. But in the last 9 years under Xi Jinping, all those have changed. You are not even allowed to think the wrong thought, let alone take any wrong action, whether we are talking about the minorities in Xinjiang or Tibet or anywhere else, or we are talking about the mainstream Han Chinese people in China proper, or for that matter, in Hong Kong. They are now all required. And if they are not listening and obeying, then they are forced to follow the party line. And human rights lawyers as a breed had now effectively been wiped out.
يؤكد تسانغ أن ما من معارضة جدية أو عملية لقيادة شي جين بينغ داخل الحزب الشيوعي الصيني، ولا حتى حول القضايا الأساسية التي يمكن أن تشكل مادة خلافية كتلك المتصلة بانتهاكات حقوق الإنسان وقمع الحريات كما يحصل في شينجيانغ أو هونغ كونغ وتايوان.
There is no opposition to Xi Jinping's leadership within the Communist Party. There is resistance. There are people within the Communist Party, including at the higher echelons of the Communist Party in the Central Committee and potentially the Politburo, who are trying to resist some of the policies that Xi Jinping are pushing, because they think those policies are wrong and potentially damaging to China. But passive resistance is not the same as open opposition. Open opposition will be crushed without mercy. And every one of them, particularly those in the senior echelons of the Communist Party, know that very well. And therefore, none of them will dare to openly oppose Xi Jinping and face the horrendous consequences that they think will befall them should they do so. When we are looking at issues like Xinjiang, Hong Kong, or Taiwan, there really is very little dissent within the Communist parties to what Xi Jinping is advocating. The kind of human rights abuse that happens in Xinjiang is not fully embraced by others within the Communist Party. So they mostly believe in their own propaganda and think that they really are doing a good deed in Xinjiang, even though the rest of the world see that as crimes against humanity, and some would even say that they would meet the UN's definition of a genocide. Very few members of the Communist Party of China see that as a valid criticism. And for those who are within the higher echelon of the party, they also would see Hong Kong as being a bit of a delinquent, behaving badly, and therefore the government, Xi Jinping, were right to impose discipline on Hong Kong. And they would also see Taiwan as being unpatriotic in not wanting to be part of China. And therefore, they are not really resisting that much in terms of what Xi Jinping are doing in all these places.
حشدت شي جين بينغ دعما كبيرا داخل حزبه وبين عامة الناس لدى رفع شعار مكافحة الفساد وشنه حملة ضد الفاسدين، غير أنه سرعان ما استغل ذلك الدعم للإفادة من القضاء على خصومه السياسيين داخل الحزب.
Now, the people who would lose out most in terms of corruption in China are the people of China themselves. It's not the Communist Party or leaders within the Communist Party who will feel that they are losers in terms of corruption. There was a systemic corruption problem when Xi Jinping took over power, and when he started his anti-corruption drive, he enjoyed quite substantial support both within the party and in particular from the general public. Now, within the Communist Party, even though most of the senior people would have been open to allegations of corruption themselves, if not all of them, many did see that if the party should fail to do something about corruption, it could fundamentally weaken the system and bring the system down. And so there was a fair bit of support for Xi Jinping to do that. Now, when Xi Jinping then demonstrated that the anti-corruption drive really was not just about anti-corruption, but it was also what in their party language is called a party ratification operation, which means that Xi Jinping is using the anti-corruption drive to remove his political opponents within the Communist Party. Then you have a lot less support within the Communist Party towards the anti-corruption movement. But in the country at large, the anti-corruption drive remains very popular because people in China are upset and angry about the scale of the corruption.
استياء الشعب الصيني جراء الفساد عارم، وهو ما يقف خلف دعمه لشي جين بينغ في حملته على الفساد، خصوصا مع نشر وسائل الإعلام الحكومية حجم الثروة التي جناها بعض الفاسدين الذين تم إسقاطهم ووجهة إنفاقهم لأموال الشعب وسبل تخزينها.
We know that the very corrupt officials sometimes try to get their money outside of China where they could, and they will use them to invest mostly in the West, in real properties and in all kinds of investments, really. North America, Canada, USA, UK, Australia, New Zealand, all these are very popular places, and European destinations as well. But we also know that a lot of the corrupt people physically store huge amount of cash and valuables in properties they own all over China. There were cases of corrupt officials who have been brought down, and the state media shows how much ill-gotten wealth were being physically recovered from those corrupt people. So they happens both being stored in China and being smuggled out of China. On specific policies, really, Xi Jinping will not be facing much serious opposition within the Communist Party. People were worried about opposing Xi Jinping and then have to pay the price for opposing him openly. Now, the Chinese economy is slowing down. It is not doing anywhere as well as they would like. But the Chinese economy is not in a crisis. Unless and until the Chinese economy is in a serious crisis that can potentially destabilize the system, it is unlikely that those within the Communist Party who are resisting passively will dare to come out and work together to try to bring Xi Jinping down. Opposing Xi Jinping is now very dangerous in China. So if you want to seriously oppose him, you have to bring him down. And we are nowhere near a situation where that can be done safely for any grouping of leaders within the Communist Party at the moment or in the foreseeable future. I would quote from one American, Bill Clinton, "Is the economy stupid?" That's what Bill Clinton said about American elections. Now, China is not a democracy, but ultimately it is still about the economy. If the Chinese economy should be in serious collapse for a sustained period of time, then whatever control Xi Jinping and the Communist Party has over the narrative, over the media, will not be strong enough to persuade people in China that they are not living in a dire strait. And the Communist Party will have failed to deliver a side of the bargain in return for people accepting and embracing Communist Party dictatorship. And at that point, I think we are going to see the resistance within the Communist Party coming out and try to get rid of Xi Jinping and reclaim the Communist Party and tries to do a new deal with people in China. So I think it is a very major economic crisis in China that we need to watch out for.
يثير سلوك الصين على مستوى السياسة الخارجية ريبة المجتمع الدولي، فعدوانيتها تقلق الدول الأخرى التي كانت تساعدها في السابق على التحول إلى قوة اقتصادية عظمى وتساعدها كذلك في مسار نموها. يوضح تسانغ ذلك في تعليقه على انحراف الصين عن الخط السياسي الذي رسمه دينغ شياوبينغ لمستقبل الدولة.
The so-called Deng Xiaoping policy line was for China to hide its capabilities and bite it for time, and therefore also hide its ambitions. There was never really a commitment on the part of Deng Xiaoping to say that China will fully integrate into the rest of the international community and abide by and fully respect the international rule-based order. The case was really about, let's wait until China has become rich and powerful and has risen so that it can lay its terms down. The difference between Xi Jinping and his two predecessors is that while Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao did not think China's moment has arisen. Xi Jinping feels that China's moment is now, and therefore there is no need for China to hide its capabilities and its ambitions and bite for time, that China should now simply come out and demand the rest of the world to play by Chinese rules and pay respect to China's reach and power. And that is basically why we have seen this shift and change in China's aggressive approach to foreign policy. And that is also why we have seen the rest of the world changed in how they respond to China. From previously in the Deng Xiaoping era, when the rest of the world not only were not worried about the rise of China, but were proactively helping China to modernize and emerge as a great power globally, to now being worried about the rise of China and what it means for them and for the international order.
يبدو أن تراجع التأثير الاستبدادي للصين وبطشها على الساحة الدولية كما الداخلية مرتبط بانحسار قوتها الاقتصادية، وإذا كان ذلك الانحسار لن يتم في المدى المنظور، من سينقذ ضحايا الصين من بطشها واستبدادها؟ أم أنه محكوم على هؤلاء انتظار رياح التغيير التي لا يبدو أنها ستهب قريباً؟